Welcome to this edition of Chalta Hai India. Chalta Hai is a phrase we hear every other day in India. Many say it's a reason why India isn't developing fast enough or India can never be a superpower. Today we are going to discuss this very interesting subject with a very eminent guest that I have with me. She's an eminent journalist, an author, an intellectual. Ma'am, Ms. Tavleen Singh, thank you so much for joining me on this discussion. Let me get straight to the subject. How serious is this issue of Chalta Hai in India?
I read your book, and I think that you have been a little bit unfair in your assessments. You talk, for instance, about how Indians don't take risks.
Yes.
Do you know the biggest risk we ever took?
Yeah.
Guess?
The democracy?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right?
Yeah.
You have a population that is totally illiterate.
Sure.
So we've taken those risks right from the beginning.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
The other risk, which was a bad risk to take, was to push us in the direction of this kind of, central controlled economy.
Sure.
Now, maybe it was the mood of the times.
Yes.
But when Indira Gandhi didn't change, when China changed, when Southeast Asia changed, she took a risk.
Absolutely.
So, the Indians. Secondly, I think that you're very unfair to ordinary Indians.
Sure.
They take a risk every morning
Similarly.
when they wake up.
Absolutely.
Right? And I work with street people right around the corner from here.
Sure.
And they would rather risk setting up a small shop than taking a job.
Sure.
And often they can't get a job because if you have no fixed address, you have no. So, I think you're unfair about that.
Sure.
And also, I think that you haven't actually fully explained what socialism did
Sure.
to India.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Just think of it even from the point of view of literature.
Sure.
In the 30s in India, you had some of the best writers, poets, Iqbal, Faiz, Manto, Harvansh Bachchan, Premchand, etc. Everything died after 47.
Sure.
There was a desert
Sure.
until, today.
Sure.
So, this is I feel that you need to understand, the damage a bit
Sure.
more.
Sure.
The damage of colonialism. You have a post-colonial country which takes the risk of
Sure.
democracy
Sure.
and socialism. So, what do? You kill the spirit of the people.
Sure. So I think it's a great point because whoever has read this book has told me that there are a lot of elements which they disagree with because it makes some strong points, and but what people have told me is it at least makes everyone think about this issue. So, ma'am, I take your point that it's a bit unfair to the people of India. In that case, what do you think is potentially wrong with this country? Because if we compare with the miracle countries in Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, China, they've grown really fast. They've done a lot of things, but somehow we don't seem to get the infrastructure, the things around us right. So, what do you think is the challenge? If you think that we're not that bad, so to say, then what is it that is kind of failing us, in your view?
I'm a political journalist, so I tend to look at things politically. I think we've been failed by our leaders.
Okay.
All good leaders know that there is a time to follow and there's a time to lead.
Sure.
Our leaders have not led. And when they have, like for instance, you had Indira Gandhi, who was a very strong leader. She led us in the wrong direction. She created dynastic democracy, which diminished our political parties to the point that now you have almost no political party that isn't a private limited company.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've been very badly let down by our leaders, and really one of the reasons why I supported, for instance, Narendra Modi, was I was hoping that he would bring change, because you see what you've really done is you've continued the colonization of India after independence, much more than before. My grandmother's generation spoke their own languages. My mother's generation spoke, her own language. Today I see Indians trying to speak English, taught badly by teachers who don't speak English themselves. So at the very top, you have the best schools in India who teach in English, but don't really teach in English that would be understood anywhere else in the world. And they have no language of their own.
Sure.
Language is very, very important because, you want to destroy a country. You've really got to, I think it was Kundra, I was just reading in one of his books who said this, that if you take away from people, their story, we had the British take it away.
Correct.
And then after that, we haven't changed it.
Absolutely.
So I was really hoping that Narendra Modi would come in and change, for instance, education. And we've got a system of colonial education that hasn't been changed.
Correct.
So we're producing little brown English people who are not even really English people and not Indians.
Sure.
So, instead of going after cows and, cow slaughter and all this sort of business,
Sure.
it's a shame that he didn't actually try to bring in the changes that are needed in the education system.
Sure.
How can you say to somebody, you must be proud of being Indian, but they have no idea what it means?
Absolutely.
I'll give you an example which I actually used in one of my colleges. Sushruth.
Yeah.
There are statues of him outside medical colleges in Australia and
Absolutely.
in India, most children have no idea what you're saying.
Correct.
Amish Tripathi
Yeah.
went with Ajit actually to, I think, Sangli College and said to them, have you studied math? And they all had because they were engineers.
Sure.
And then he said, how many of you heard of Bhaskaracharya?
Or Aryabhat, yeah.
One guy put his hand up. Aryabhat is more famous.
Yeah, relatively.
One guy out of this whole group of engineers.
Sure.
So, those are the changes that you
Sure.
hoped the leaders would make. They didn't make them.
Sure. So I think that leads us to two related points. One, I think what you're clearly saying is that we are a country of great fighting, risk-taking, capable people, but we don't have great systems. And you thought that, a leader like Modi will bring about a systemic change which will make India a more system and process-driven country. Is that what you're hinting at as well?
I'm absolutely saying that because he promised minimum government.
Correct.
Right? And maximum governance.
Sure.
Now, to do that, you've got to have administrative changes. You've got to stop making, officials do stupid things.
Absolutely.
So, for instance, a small example.
Yeah.
Most countries don't have what's called an arrival card for its own citizens.
Yes.
Right? You have
Yes.
a passport, and that's good enough.
Absolutely.
We had an arrival card till about a year or two ago.
Sure.
They changed that.
Yeah.
But now if you arrive at immigration in India without a boarding pass, they don't let you in.
My goodness. Okay.
So that's just a small example, right? To renew a passport in India, for example, a passport should be your right,
Absolutely.
right? To renew a passport, or not even to renew it, if you just want to get some pages on your booklet, just check how many forms you fill in.
Correct.
So that was colonial governance. They
Sure.
didn't trust the people. So and there were 12,000 English people ruling a continent.
Correct.
So they had these rules. All of that should have changed.
Sure.
There should be administrative change if you want minimum government. It hasn't happened.
Sure. I think the other thing you are hinting at very clearly, you gave the cultural examples, the confidence of the people, is that how do you get the people to be more, if I can loosely say, proud or self-esteemed? And I think that leads me to second point in the book, which is the lack of aspirations. Do you believe that today, because of the colonial mindset and other things, the level of aspirations, because finally, end of the day, it's the passion which drives people to achieve something and go out and do something. Do you think we lack in that self-esteem or confidence or aspirations to go out and make things happen?
Not at all. We have a very aspirational electorate. Chidambaram in the 2014 election said that we thought we were dealing with a supplicant
Sure.
population.
Sure.
We didn't realize we were dealing with an aspirational population.
Absolutely.
Right? They are very, very aspirational. But the trouble is, if you don't give them the possibility of getting a job
Sure.
that is not a government job,
Yeah. Yeah.
then they will have to look for government jobs, because what else can they do?
Sure.
You have a private sector which bends the rules when they hire someone because you can't sack anyone.
Correct.
You know, you have, what is it now? I think that if you have more than 100 people employed in a company,
Yeah.
you can't sack anybody without permission from the government.
Correct.
So, you know, it's all of those things. We have systems, they're just the wrong ones.
Sure.
And you have a very, very aspirational, they want everything to change, you know.
Sure.
I travel a lot in the villages, and their aspirations are middle class, even if they have nothing. So I don't agree with that at all.
Fair enough. So I think the other point is related to this is, at the end of the day, is the people who elect the leaders, right? So what would stop the people to be participative and try and make the changes that you're looking for? I agree with you that the systems are not good enough. What can people do today to change these systems and, you know, be a part of the system? Because the other counter argument could be, end of the day, it's the government which people deserve that they get. What is it that the people can do to make this change happen? Or should we just wait for the government to do it for us?
You've got political parties that are private limited companies. So what do? You close the doors of political power to all your people. You have government schools that are so bad that you come out illiterate at the end of them.
Correct.
So they don't have the opportunity to participate.
Sure.
They don't read. How many villages have you seen where they have a bookshop?
Not many.
A library.
Sure.
How many government schools have libraries?
Sure.
So, basically what you've done is, that's all part of this. The British did it on purpose.
Sure.
They had an idea that we had to control this population. So in fact, even with Indian art or literature, etc., they said it was nothing, because that was a colonial thing.
Sure.
But you don't expect your own leaders to continue that process.
Sure.
This is what they've done.
Sure.
So it really all comes down in a country that hasn't developed fully, that is half made. The politicians are very, very important.
Sure.
And we have a really bad bunch. I mean, look at Parliament has become a sort of diners club.
Correct.
Which is a membership only for those whose daddy or mummy can give them a political party. Here, darling, take a political party. Most of these people have never held down a job.
Correct.
They're sitting in Parliament. Why would they come into Parliament? They're not coming from public service.
Sure.
They're coming because you make money out of politics.
Sure.
So it's a really bad time.
Sure. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, as we all know, India was a great country with a great heritage. The Harappan civilization was the best. So when I was analyzing the book, I went to the history of India, 3,000, 4,000 years. It was quite fascinating. I had my own conclusions about when this Chalta Hai thing seeped into the governance and the administration. What is your view as to when did we as a civilization started falling in terms of people not being able to getting the opportunity that they should get?
I don't know. But, you were ruled by Muslim rulers for a while who treated the local population as second-class citizens, right? You then have the British coming and doing the same thing.
Sure.
And you have, actually you have to give credit to the Indians who were local, to the Hindus actually,
Sure.
that they've survived.
Absolutely.
That we haven't become Iran.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, Iran, there was much more by the sword.
Yeah.
But you see, if you don't tell people what their history is, what the books are that have been written in this country. I mean, there's literature that is thousands of years old.
Sure.
And there are texts in Sanskrit that remain untranslated. And you have a lot of fools, one of the fools is giving you a recommendation. I would take it off the cover. Rajiv Malhotra. Alright? Rajiv Malhotra. The guy is a joke. All that he has done is denounce Western scholarship. Why doesn't he do some scholarship of his own?
Sure.
Why? And that is a typical chippy, colonial, colonized idea. He lives in America.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And spends his whole time denouncing Western scholars.
Sure.
Some of them are friends of mine. They're rishis.
Yeah.
What they've done for India. Sheldon Pollock, for instance.
Yes.
I don't know whether you've come across the Clay Sanskrit Library.
Yeah. Yeah.
and now Murthy has taken it, Narayan Murthy has taken it over.
Correct.
I mean, that is, that's more service to Sanskrit than our own rishis have done.
Sure.
And, here is this punk, attacking, scholarship.
Absolutely.
And if you want to attack scholarship, you have to be a scholar.
Sure.
If you want to attack journalists, you've got to be a journalist.
Correct.
To be able to. And he's a typical example of the kind of people that have been promoted by the RSS. And, I think the RSS means well, but their vision is so limited that they can only find people like this. There are real scholars in this country.
Sure.
There are texts that need translation. Why don't we do anything about that?
Absolutely. So I think taking from there, what do you think should be the agenda for common people in terms of knowing more about the culture, knowing more about our history? Because what you clearly
They can't do it.
They
can't do it. You have to have they can't create
a leadership who can make that happen for them.
You need in the past 4 years there's been no education policy.
Yeah, no significant decision on that.
No, there's been no education policy.
Yes.
Now, if you don't have a policy, how do you bring about change?
Correct.
You've got to identify the things that need to be changed. It's all very well to say to some illiterate villager, oh, you should improve your school.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what a good school should look like.
Sure.
He now, and by the way, I've been a journalist for 40 years. I can remember a time when one village didn't know what was going on in the next village.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
I remember going to Palamu district,
Sure.
and there was a village near Daltonganj, which was like 5 kilometers away, in which there was bonded labourers.
Sure.
They had never heard of Daltonganj. Forget about Patna.
Sure.
So it was easy then for them to be exploited. So you continue to exploit the people, and then you say to them, improve yourselves, learn about history. Oh yeah, where?
Sure. So I think clearly you're saying there has to be a leadership assistance,
Yes.
the vision passing down to the last level of village and so on. My last question to you is, do you think that in this whole change process, one of the things we potentially lacking, and I have researched on this and I kind of believe in that, is that we lack good quality leaders coming out of the system who can take on these closed door political private limited parties and knock their doors. We had people like Arvind Kejriwal coming out. I'm not commenting on whether he's good or bad, but the question is more and more such people coming out, joining the mainstream leadership, and not just in the political front, but also educational front, all fronts. It could be a panchayat level. So do you think that we potentially lack people with, I won't say courage, but wanting to take leadership roles and change the masses?
You've closed the doors.
But is it so bad?
Yes, you see people who are doing wonderful stuff in terms of as NGOs, in public service, and in all these areas, in education and religion, and they're not allowed. There's no. Every political party is now whichever one you mention it, and you've got as 35%, I think, of the Lok Sabha, of the last Lok Sabha, which was dominated by the Congress Party, were as. That's a shocking figure.
Right.
So, if it was going to be Sachin Pilot, then he would bring in his son, and Chandrababu Naidu would bring in his son, and Mulayam Singh Yadav, Sharad Pawar, name them.
Sure.
These are your great leaders,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, there was a time in India, at the time of the freedom movement, where there were real leaders.
Sure.
There was Tilak and Gokhale and Gandhi and Nehru, and they were giants,
Yes.
even by today's standards.
Yeah.
And where have they gone? You don't allow them in.
Yeah.
So they then find ways of doing whatever they can in other spheres,
Sure.
but don't enter public life because it's impossible because the doors are closed.
Sure.
The Lok Sabha is a diners club,
Sure.
and the Rajya Sabha too, because unless you kiss ass to the Prime Minister, you don't get into the Rajya Sabha.
Sure.
And in the Lok Sabha, you don't get a ticket unless you're related to somebody who's politically powerful.
Sure.
So it's a very bad
So it's
situation.
become a coterie of people who have closed the doors to the outside
Yes.
people and so on. So, one last question. In such a scenario, then, do you think that the level of, you already mentioned that the situation is bad, do you think that the level of Chalta Hai is gradually going down, or you think that the scenario is worsening by the day? Are you optimistic?
I'm very optimistic. You don't know what it was like, Chalta Hai, about 30 or 40 years ago.
Sure.
You don't know what India looked like then.
Sure.
You could be living on the edge of Khan Market and go there and not get sugar
Sure.
at Diwali, and you'd say, ठीक है जी चलता है ऐसा होता है ये जी हिंदुस्तान में होता है.
Correct.
You would go for a gas cylinder. नहीं जी आप 4 दिन बाद आइए.
Yes.
All of that has changed.
Absolutely.
And people are no longer as patient
Yeah.
about which is why Modi could be in trouble, because
Sure.
you know they voted for him because of parivartan.
Correct.
And that parivartan they thought would come like an andhi and sweep away these one of the things he should have done straight away.
Yeah.
We're the only country in the world where the poorest people who have no homes of their own pay for our wretched elected representatives
Correct.
to live like princes.
Correct.
And it's not just Lutyens, Delhi, it's in every state capital. Just down the road from here,
Yes.
there are the ministers. Why are they living? Why are we paying for them to live like that?
Absolutely.
Why can't they find their own rented accommodation as they do in other democracies?
Sure.
So, it is really, it's changing, but it's not changing fast enough.
So you're saying you're optimistic about the way things are moving?
Oh, yeah.
Taking a 70-year view since independence, but you're saying that there is more that need to be done. So in summary, you were saying it's the governance,
Leadership.
It's the leadership.
It's the absence of real leaders that is
Sure.
our biggest problem.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I think we thank Tavleen ji so much for her views. It's the leadership which is lacking. The system needs to change. People are aspiring. They're asking for more and more. It's the leadership which has to respond to give a more open door policy, more poor friendly, more opportunity generating kind of a scenario for the people. Thank you so much, Tavleen ji.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.